The Hill House is described as Mackintosh's finest domestic work. He did the other house, Windy Hill, just over the water from here a few years earlier. It's smaller. It's probably not quite as expansive of his ideas at the time. So we see this as his absolute epitome, apotheosis of his domestic work. And it's very much a crossing point in styles for Mackintosh. So at the same time he was building the second phase of the art school in Glasgow, 1902 to 1904, working very precisely for a local family, for a Glasgow publishing family, the Blackies. And from all the correspondence we see, it was very much a kind of collaborative process, as much as it can be with any architect, designer, artist has such a vision as Mackintosh. But genuinely, the feeling is that it was an equal discussion that went on. So Walter Blackie, the publisher, had a very firm idea of what he wanted, both in style and in function for the house. He had a quite large family, perhaps not for the time, of 4, then 5 children by the time the house was finished. And he wanted a home, he wanted a house. And when the building was finished, Mackintosh famously presented it to him and said, this is not a chateau, it's not an Italian villa, this is a home. So this is a house for dwelling in. And it feels like that. So the rooms, by and large, are very domestic. This is one of the finer rooms, the white bedroom for Walter Blackie and Agnes, his wife. But overall, the building's very functional. It's quite a tight plan. It works well for Blackie himself to have entertained some of his Glasgow publishing friends or business friends to come here, but right at the front of the house. And that's the only bit you get to. You don't really penetrate beyond that. After that, it becomes very much a domestic home for meals and for the children and for the teaching, the nursery, etc. So it's a functional house, but externally, well, I'll stay with the interior for a moment because we are in the interior. This is where we know that Margaret, his wife, who is an artist and at least of equal genius, Mackintosh himself would have said she is the genius. He absolutely deferred to his wife on that. But modesty aside, Mackintosh and Margaret MacDonald worked on the inside, we know that. So the very feminine white rooms that he has through a lot of his properties, his designs, you do feel the hand of Margaret in spaces like this. So you have the stenciling on the walls, you have the roses, you have the beautiful motifs in the fitted bedroom furniture. You have that line that he always struck of just short of the ceiling where you follow everything. So whether it's the undersides of the windows, the tops of the wardrobes, the base of the lights, everything's lining through. And you're standing in a typical vaulted, cocooned cradle structure where the bed is, but then you have a slight breakout into the area of where you sit by the fire, and everything's about reading a book. So every nook and cranny and every fireplace has places to have books. It's very much focusing on education and enlightenment and just broadening one's awareness and knowledge. The building has that dichotomy between the white spaces and the really dark, intimate spaces, which again, very typical of Mackintosh. In all his buildings, you have this passage from bright light into dark, very warm, cosy, almost closed down spaces, very calm spaces, and then you burst into these areas of light again. That happens, this kind of movement, this drama throughout his properties. And this epitomizes it. So the hallway, very dark and closeted, and then you come into the bedroom space and it's filled with light. This is south facing, and you would, in the morning, this would have been just illuminating to have woken up in.
My name's Ruth. I'm one of the visitor services assistants here at Hill House, and conservation is very much at the forefront of our minds here within the National Trust, but particularly here at Hill House with the current conservation project that we're undertaking. So this is a very unique project. It's not something that has ever been undertaken anywhere else in the world, at least not to this scale and size. The exterior is encased with a steel cage frame with chainmail on the outside that's actually made up of over 13 million chainmail links. And that is something that's helping protect us from about 85% of the weather, but it's also allowing natural airflow to come through to help the house dry, and as well keeping it in a nice stable environment so that we're not putting it under too much pressure too quickly. Because the main problem here at Hill House is that it is exceptionally damp. So unfortunately, due to the type of render that was used on the outside when the house was first constructed, water hasn't been able to move throughout the house as it should, moisture hasn't been able to move through the house as it should, and it means that that is just built and built and built over time. And that's because of, as I said, the Portland cement render on the outside, which is a completely impermeable layer, so it's not breathable in any way. And in 1902, when the house was started, this was a relatively new building material. And we think that Macintosh was using it in all good faith, that he was sold it as a sort of wonder render that was going to solve all the problems that you have in the West Coast with water ingress, with damp, and that just unfortunately wasn't true. So it means that with that impermeable layer, the underlying work on the house, so the bricks, the sandstone underneath, has been significantly degraded over time. And actually in 2017, when the box project was first started, we were seeing significant degradation within the walls itself, and there was extreme concern about subsidence, so the walls actually starting to crumble away. We were finding underneath the floorboards and the crawl spaces, behind certain objects in the house, piles of brick dust where the walls themselves were actually starting to degrade away, which again is not something you particularly want in a house, and particularly one that you're trying to preserve for the future. So something very drastic was proposed, and it was the Hill House box. So this was designed by architects Carmody Groark, and they won the commission from us, and it has been working as it should. We're seeing some really, really good results from that. And we're also seeing the house drying nice and slowly, which is what we want. So it's envisaged as a 10-year project, quite a long-term project, but that's because we have to dry the house out exceptionally slowly so that we're not damaging any of the interior. So if we were, for example, just to put a big dehumidifier in the middle of the space, which a few people have suggested, it means that if we were to take the moisture out too quickly, we have a lot of wood in the collection, a lot of plaster work, a lot of very important wall designs that would see significant damage as a result. So we're wanting to dry it out as slowly as we possibly can.